week. I have been over at the legislature at the Capitol building, I think maybe 3 days this week. And I'm pushing for, I've got a lot of hope for the grand jury and for the way that we do things in our state. So there's 2 pieces of legislation pending in the Senate and the House that I've proposed amendments to, and I'm going around meeting with as many legislators as I can to generate some traction, and there's some pretty interesting feedback. But anyway, so let's start on the first paragraph of chapter 14. I guess this is page 110 for those of you who have a copy. In that first paragraph, as I've been doing throughout these classes, things that David Haig had highlighted in his copy, there was actually a number of things that he highlighted in this chapter. So the first thing that he highlighted was sentence number 1. For those Alaskans reading this study, hopefully by now there is little doubt in your minds that the grand jury is the appropriate body to investigate and report on anything that affects our public welfare. And hopefully, everyone listening to this, there in the room and online realizes that now, that this is the answer to investigate and report to the public on things that are of concern to the public. And then the last sentence in that paragraph, David had highlighted, the common law is very clear. It is up to the grand jurors to decide among themselves what and who they want to investigate. No judge or prosecutor can decide for them. So, again, when I wrote this, I had no idea what was going to come down with Supreme Court Order 1993. I wasn't even aware of Ray Southwell's case, where he was a grand juror, and the judge and the prosecutor prevented him from investigating something he was trying to bring his fellow grand jurors' attention to. So what we've learned and what this sentence underscores is that what the judge and the prosecutor did in Kenai was flat wrong. Going to the next paragraph, the last sentence there, David had underlined or highlighted, all Alaskan grand jurors must be mindful of the public trust that has been placed on their shoulders for a short period of time. And I can't emphasize that more. Everybody in this room, everybody online, it kind of reminds me of the disciples, where we all need to go out and inform and educate others. And one of the things I'll be getting into later this evening is the essential need for nonpartisan grand juries, to where all parties are represented and they're nonpartisan. But and that's part of the public trust. And I think I have a comment later in the chapter about that, and how that worked out for the Juneau grand jury. I mean, think about it. The Juneau grand jury did a great job, but if they had messed up, if that had turned into a witch hunt, as the Democrats tried to pin on them, we may not be having these conversations today. But they did such an exemplary job that they really paved the way for us. And I can only hope that, as we're trying to, get the Kenai grand jury, for them to investigate fully and report, Thomas Garber and Holly and Betty Jo are trying to get a grand jury off the ground in Anchorage to look into the OCS. I'm trying to get grand juries off the ground here in Juneau. let's all be mindful in all of these efforts that, there's a lot of public trust that's being placed on our shoulders, and let's not screw it up for the next generation. Going on to the next paragraph, there was a couple thoughts there that I wanted to highlight. My first sentence there, it reads, in today's internet era, the investigatory and reporting powers of the Alaska grand jury are needed more than ever. And that the last sentence there, I go, as a result, and this is talking about drastic cuts to newspaper staffs, the media services in Alaska are ill-equipped to undertake the type of investigative reporting that in times past brought government misconduct or corruption to the surface. And, we're all familiar with Watergate and how, Woodward and Bernstein broke that story. But, I experienced that here in Juneau with the Thomas Jack case. I decided to write a 6-part, I think it was a 6 or 7-part series on Thomas's case, on his wrongful conviction and how state government officials, violated his constitutional rights and all the politics that were involved in that. So I wrote I was like, wow, this could be a week-long series in the Juneau Empire. And so I wrote 6 or 7 chapters, and I was just, each one was like, I think under, 1,000 words. And when I presented it to the Juneau Empire, I did talk to the editor, and he told me, he said it would take a budget of $50,000 in 3 years for me to put a reporter on this story that you just wrote. And he goes, I don't have the budget for it. So, right there is proof that when there's misconduct in the state government, we can't rely on, newspapers to do the investigation and the reporting. So, the grand jury is much more important than it was. And, that just reminds me of what a couple other places in this book where I think it was Judge Vanderbilt, in his opinion, in Camden, he talked about, grand juries are needed even more today than they were, back around, at the start of the country, because governments are so much more sophisticated. And as we see governments grow and grow, that's not stopping, it's getting bigger. But the ability of newspapers to hold them in check. And I saw a great movie I hadn't seen before, was called Shock. I saw it over the weekend on, I think Saturday night, it was on Prime Video. And it was called Shock and Awe, and it had Woody Harrelson. And it was about the invasion of Iraq. You all remember that back in after 9/11 and 2002 and 2003. The weapons of mass destruction is what the Bush administration, Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney, all those guys, they sold it to the American public, and there was never any weapons of mass destruction that were found. And at the end of that movie, there's the credits that, and it reminded, it drew parallels to the Tonkin Gulf crisis, which is how we got into Vietnam. False reporting, false flags. And, but they referred to the Fourth Estate in that movie. And I'd never heard of the term Fourth Estate before. I Googled it, and turns out it had to do with the media, the press. And, the Fourth Estate has been, throughout our history, has often kept government in check. And, but now, because of, just the changes in the media, the grand jury really needs to step into that role more than it already has. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Going down to the bottom of the page, the last paragraph, you know, there's a concept of preventative maintenance here. Yeah, you know, we got all these things that need to be investigated in our state. Almost every branch, you know, not every, you know, every department in government probably needs to be investigated. We got a lot to do. We got a big backlog. You know, we're like Boeing. We got a 4-year backlog of jets that we need to deliver. But once we clear through that backlog over the next 4 or 5 years, I think what we're going to find is the fact that grand juries, the fact that government officials know that the grand jury is back in action, it's gonna stop a lot of misconduct. It's gonna, you know, when people know that they got somebody looking over their shoulders, they tend to do a better job. You know, it doesn't have to be corruption; it can just be competence. And you know, so in that last paragraph, I underlined, you know, in the future, simply knowing they might be summoned by the grand jury, as Mr. Sheffield's assistant was, should help keep many government employees on the straight and narrow path in putting the public's interest first. And remember, Mr. Sheffield's assistant was the one who was told to leave the Capitol building, walk 2 or 3 blocks down to the Baranoff Hotel, and call up the political fundraiser and let them know that they are under investigation. So when the public knows that the grand jury is back in action, you know, maybe in that case, the assistant would have said, no, I'm not doing that. You do it. You know, who, you know, that the you was the chief of staff for the governor. You know, I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want a grand jury to find out. You do it. So I think it'll stop a lot of bad behavior. And then David Haig had underlined the last sentence there on page 110 and leading into the next, you know, the next page. And this is one of my favorite quotes in the whole book. The grand jury's power to enforce transparency in government affairs has many advantages. For instance, recall chapter 5 containing the quote by Mr. Dewey alluding to this benefit. Quote, when you are sitting, you are practically the boss of the town. If you don't believe it, just send a subpoena to the biggest official in town and see how quickly he responds and how humbly he tells his story, unquote. So, you know, this is why the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, this is, you know, Winfrey, now he's retired, but, you know, this is why all 5 Supreme Court judges and Treg Taylor signed off on this on SCO 1993, because they fear the grand jury. They don't want the grand jury to send a subpoena to the biggest official in town. So, you know, we just need to keep persevering, and, you know, their day will come. Dropping down a few more paragraphs then, the 4th paragraph down from there, which starts out the Juneau grand jury. You know, so here I'm one last time, I'm going to sing the, you know, the praises of the Juneau grand jury, because again, they took that public trust, that burden that was on their shoulders, and they carried it through to perfection, and they left us a path. They showed us the way on how it's supposed to be done right and how it works. You know, I didn't have to go out and look at grand juries in the state of Montana or Iowa or Florida or any place like that. Because of what they did, I was able to bring it home right here to our state. And it's like I've said in previous sessions, it's a model for the nation. I mean, this is how grand juries should operate throughout the country. So, you know, I hope that, you know, people from around the country start contacting us in Alaska here to find out more about how grand juries should be run. So I'm just going to read these, most of these two paragraphs. The Juneau grand jury was a diverse group of citizens with no overall bias. They operated in anonymity and maintained that status even after they were discharged by Judge Pegues. Now remember, when they were interviewed by the Fairbanks Daily News, they only agreed to the interview if their names were kept anonymous. And to me, that's just another big feather in their cap. The next sentence there, no permanent power channels were established. These people basically took down a governor. That's power. I mean, that's an insane amount of power. And then it was gone. They left, they done their job, they left and moved on and went back to their regular lives. And we saw going all the way back to chapter 1 in England. That's the beauty of the grand jury, because there's no permanent, power corrupts. And so, there was no permanent power there. They took their oath, fulfilled their duty, discerned the truth, and then moved on. They felt a sense of pride in the work they did and the sacrifices they made, knowing that by informing their fellow citizens of the truth, Alaska would become a better place. So I wrote a little note to myself here, and it reads as follows. It is my prayer that one day I'll be able to write a second edition of my book and sing the praises of the Kenai grand jury like I have throughout of the Juneau one. So, we know that this grand jury in Kenai has been meeting now for a while. We know that they've subpoenaed some people, some important people. We've heard that maybe they've subpoenaed even more important people. So I hope that at the end of the day, and again, I hope that people on that grand jury are hearing, are knowledgeable of what we're doing here. But yeah, I really want to write, a follow-up to this book, a success story. I'd really like to write a success story. And to be able to say that just like the Juneau one, the Kenai grand jury went in there, they fulfilled their duty, they investigated thoroughly, they reported, they discerned the truth, and they made lasting impact in Alaska. Because if they do their job here, it's going to make a difference. So moving on to the next paragraph. I brought this up, I think, in another session, but the individuals who served on the Juneau grand jury and their families deserve an apology from Alaska state officials. The legislature and governor should jointly pass a resolution in the winter session of 2023 apologizing to the members of the Juneau grand jury for their treatment by the politicians who preceded them. And I talked a little bit about that at the end of that one chapter. And, hopefully this is something that the Grand Jury Association could work with me on. I think that would be, I know we got our hands full with, March 14th and the pending legislation that I'll be getting into. And maybe that'll have to wait till next year, but I'm hoping that the grand jury, that you that are with the Grand Jury Association, you can work with me on that, because I think it's important. Then my last sentence there, their work should be highlighted in future grand jury handbooks as an example of how grand juries should fulfill their important duties. So, we talked about that last week. We talked about the big changes that were made from 1961 to 2019, and how the whole thing about investigative grand juries were just kind of shuffled off to the back of the book. Not only do we need to bring those back to the forefront in grand jury handbooks, but I think the Juneau case should be an example for grand juries. how they operate, and that should be in the handbook. Going on to the next paragraph, the last sentence of that paragraph I want to read. The court system should develop a program that properly educates grand jurors and establish an online depository where all grand jury reports can be accessed by citizens. So again, this is some, well, and let me back up there. There was something that I should have highlighted. At the beginning of that paragraph, I said, first and foremost, the Supreme Court should immediately issue an order rescinding Criminal Rule 6.1 and its unconstitutional hindrance on the grand jury's reporting power and vacating their O'Leary decision. Well, we know that they didn't do that. We know that that's not going to happen voluntarily. Instead of rescinding Supreme Court Order 938 and Criminal Rule 6.1, they doubled or tripled down with Supreme Court Order 1993. So we know they're not going to do it voluntarily. But in this pending legislation, I hope we're going to be able to get it done. And and together with this legislation, the amendments I'm proposing, proper education of grand jurors, I think, can be made part and parcel of that. And we also need to have this online depository where all grand jury reports can be accessed by citizens. And that's something that I think that you all up in Kenai involved in Anchorage, involved with the Grand Jury Association, I think that would be a great thing to have a link on your website to work with the court system. Once we get the court system to the point where they understand that they need to work with us, all these grand jury reports that have been done in the past should be available online for public access, so that anybody can look to see if other similar issues have been investigated. Let's draw on the knowledge of grand juries. I mean, I can go over to the law library here in Juneau in the state courthouse building, and I can pull up, I can go back and I can pull up, the Senate and the House record, the legislative record for any bill that's been brought forward in the Alaska legislature for the last 60 years. I should be able to do that for grand jury reports. As we've seen, the grand jury, we've had a couple experts tell us that the grand jury is next to the legislature, really the most important branch of government. So we should have access to all these reports. Okay, moving on to the next page. I'm going to read the whole first paragraph of the next page. I go, each judge in Alaska should become intimately familiar with the common law roots of the Alaska grand jury and its importance to our founders. They should understand and promote the vital role that our grand juries play in ensuring a healthy democracy and increasing public interest in government. They should study the works of both Lord Somers and Professor Younger, becoming conversant with the nearly 1,000 years of common law precedent that are documented in those two works. They must ensure their actions incorporate important common law concepts, including the grand jury's independence and what a proper investigation should look like. So I'm going to start out a little bit with what I've proposed in the amendments, the bills, and I sent these out to, I think, about 6 or 7 of you that I had email addresses for, and I hope that you've distributed them to other people, and you can make it available to anybody who's interested online. But one of the things I've proposed is that, and the two bill numbers are Senate Bill 31, introduced by Senator Mike Shower, and House Bill 82, introduced by Representative George Rauscher. And they're mirror bills, and they're working their way through the committees right now. And I've proposed amendments, and they're the same to each bill. And one of the things that is in there is that I would like the legislature to create a grand jury judge or magistrate for each district. And let me just read it, what I wrote. I've emailed a number of legislators. I go, this is just an overview. It's not the exact statute language, but the overview would be: create a position for grand jury judges or magistrates in each judicial district. They can swear in grand jurors, help screen for bias, and explain the duties inherent in the juror's oath, provide recommendations for competent, independent legal counsel, render legal advice upon request, and approve reports for release, like Judge Pegues did in Juneau in 1985, when the grand jury recommended Sheffield's impeachment. Expressly state that under common law and our Constitution, grand jury inquiries and reports can't be controlled by the judiciary. And the procedure that was followed in 1985 can only be changed by a constitutional amendment. SCO 938 and 1993 were inappropriate, as detailed in my book. And so, and this is allowed under the Constitution. Under Section 4 of the under Article 4 of the Constitution, which deals with the judiciary, the only courts that are required to be, or the only judges that are required to be nominated by the Alaska Judicial Council are the Supreme Court and the Superior Court. So right now, Court of Appeal judges and district courts are created by the legislature. Now, up to this point, the legislature has allowed the Alaska Judicial Council to nominate the judges for those courts, but the legislature can take back that power and they can assign it elsewhere. So that's another aspect of my amendment, is that I want the people to be able to vote directly for these judges in each district, and so that there's accountability to the people. The way the original bills were written, it would be the governor who would select the names, and then I think he would select the people or the judges, and then they would be subject to legislative approval. I mean, that's definitely an improvement over the Alaska Judicial Council, but you're still going to have politics in play. You're still going to have the kingpins in the legislature, telling junior legislators that, hey, you vote for this bill and your district will get another $1 million in funding or something like that. You're not going to have separation of powers. So I'd like to see these legislative created judges, Court of Appeals, district court, grand juries, and then another one I'm suggesting is family court, which would be judges who are, they understand CENA and, which is child in need cases. They understand the federal regulations. They understand the state statutes. They could always also be used in child custody cases. But these people would be required to know, there would be proficiency standards. Not anybody could just be a judge. It would be like continuing education that we have in, lawyers, engineers, medical profession. There's continuing education courses that you have to take and pass. And so I think we need to have specialists. And the family court idea is something that, would help in cases like Alaska Mom, what I wrote about in Must Read Alaska. I mean, that tragedy, just a gut-wrenching tragedy of having your kids taken away from you for 2 years and not having a judge adjudicate the issue. So anyway, I'll get off that now for a little bit, and let's go back now to the book. We are on page 112, and we're going to skip down to the third paragraph. Superior Court judges should also strive to educate the grand jurors on their common law powers and the duties inherent to their oaths. Educational materials distributed by the Alaska court system, such as the handbook, should be reviewed by the judges and not provided to grand jurors if they do not accurately portray their common law rights and responsibilities. Grand jurors should never be led to believe they can't do their own investigations or satisfy their own curiosity. Then on to the next paragraph. Superior Court judges should communicate frequently with grand juries under their charge to ensure they completely understand their duties and are administrating them properly. The judges should take it upon themselves to periodically check in with the grand jurors to ensure that they are taking an active role in the investigations and using their independent judgment to evaluate evidence. They must ensure that the citizens fully comprehend their independence from both the prosecution and the court and aren't simply, quote, a rubber stamp. When deficiencies are noted, the judges should take appropriate action, being mindful that indictments are not valid if grand jurors have not properly carried out their oaths. Judges must do everything in their power to wipe out the abuses that have led to the commonly known phrase that, quote, prosecutors can get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich, unquote. Any Alaskan judge hearing that phrase repeated in his or her district should be personally embarrassed and feel compelled to resolve that perception. So, going back to the amendments that I've proposed, the way I wrote it in the book, it was Superior Court judges. And if this legislation doesn't pass, we still want to push for Superior Court judges who understand the ins and the outs of the grand jury system. And I think the best way to do this is, as I've proposed, to have either grand jury judges or magistrates with limited powers. The legislature can expressly limit the powers that they have, so that they're basically doing what grand jury judges have historically done. And that brings us back to Judge Pegues when he reviewed that report. He said, it's not up to me. He says, if I disagree with the grand jury and their findings, that's not my role. That's not my power. He goes, all I can do is make sure that this report, is within their jurisdiction. And as we've seen, almost anything is within the jurisdiction of the grand jury because they have such broad powers guaranteed to it by our founding fathers. Then the next paragraph on page 112, and this is second from the bottom. So, and this deals with criminal indictments. This doesn't deal with grand jury investigations and reports, but it's just so important. I mean, you look at, we got into this mess. We got into Rule 6.1 in Supreme Court 938 and Supreme Court Order 1993 because the grand jury recommended that a governor be impeached. And politicians didn't like that power. So they started putting the grand jury under their thumb. And look at all the protections that Bill Sheffield got. I mean, he got to testify for hours in front of the grand jury, but yet they complained about that. And just compare that to Thomas Jack. Thomas, in people that are facing criminal indictment, they get no chance. The prosecutor dominates the whole procedure. And so we need, it's almost like the grand jury judge should be a watchdog of the prosecutor and to let the grand jurors know that they're the ones in control. It's not the prosecutor, it's the grand jury. And that's, if there's only one thing that a grand jury judge does, it's that. And then going on to the very last paragraph on page 112. Judges should satisfy themselves that grand juries have an awareness of the reputation and character of an accused person and any witnesses. How can reputation not be a relevant factor in properly screening for the false or staged testimony that Lord Summers cautioned grand jurors to be watchful for? Most citizens needing the services of an auto mechanic or plumber will check out their reputation before making a decision. Why on earth should a grand jury handle an indictment or presentment any differently? So again, and Lord Summers talked about this extensively in chapter 1, where reputation and character matter. We need to get that back in our legal system. Like, for instance, in some of these cases, by statute, you can't bring in the reputation or character of a witness. Even, it's like, we all learned growing up, I did, the story of the boy who cried wolf. You lie the first couple times and it's kind of on you, and but we've gotten rid of that. And because there's a case right here in Juneau, it was one of the cases that I wanted investigated, where a grand juror voted to indict a person for alleged sexual assault. And he left the courthouse and he went down to the bus station here in Juneau, and he runs into the accuser and her supporting witness. And in the grand jury room, they were all crying and tearful and everything else. He gets down there, they're laughing, they're giggling, they're doing some inappropriate things. And he hears them laughing about how easy it is to get rid of somebody, just by making those allegations. If you want to get rid of them, accuse them of this, take them to the grand jury, and they'll be sent away. They're laughing and giggling about it, having a good old time. So he goes back and he tells the judge and the prosecutor what he saw. And he says, I believe that those two women were gaming the system. They were lying, and I want to change my vote. And not only did the judge and the prosecutor and another judge not do anything about it, but it turned out that the accuser, there was evidence that she had falsely accused two other men in the prior year or two. And the attorney for this guy wanted to be able to bring this into evidence, and the judge refused. So again, look at the difference between the grand jury and the trial court. And in fact, I'm talking to some people now, and they see this as the key to reform in our criminal justice system, especially for, I've talked about this, where Alaska Natives represent 40% of our prison population, which is more than double their representation in the general population. And because they, a lot of natives don't have the money to fight a lot of charges. And we're seeing today that it can cost $150,000, $200,000 to fight off the Department of Law. And Alaska mom, false accusation, spent well over $100,000 trying to get her children back. It's no contest. So if we get grand juries involved from the beginning, it's really going to make a difference. We can cut down, because false accusations, they hurt real victims. I've interviewed victims who have told me that false accusations, the pain that false accusations bring to those who have really suffered. So it's really important to have judges that will understand, they should read my book. They should read Lord Summers and tell grand jurors, this is what you got to do. Don't be a rubber stamp. Go out and investigate. Go out into the communities. If it's in a village, make sure some people on the grand jury have gone to the village and investigate, check on reputation, check on character, because it matters. We can't get rid of character in the courtroom. It makes no sense. And I'll read going on to the next page. We are now, let's see, and it's 7:13. Let me try to wrap this up in the next 10 minutes. So page 113, all Alaska judges need to ensure that local issues are being considered by local grand jurors. According to the common law, as documented by Lord Summers, grand jurors should be from the neighborhood where an incident is said to have occurred. It was considered a benefit if any members knew some of the parties on or facts and shared those thoughts with the entire group. For example, a Juneau grand jury may not be qualified to consider the facts of a criminal case in Petersburg or a municipal matter in Hoonah. Besides a lack of familiarity with these communities, some of the non-local grand jurors may lack sufficient motivation to discern the truth. And what I'm saying there is, you bring a case to Juneau grand jurors that involves people in Hoonah or Sitka or Petersburg, and maybe they don't care as much. It's not their community. Why should they, really make a big effort to try to uncover the truth, especially in a difficult case? So when in my business of, financial instruments, there's something we call skin in the game. People who have skin in the game tend to do, they're more accountable. So we need to have grand jurors or grand juries with people on them that represent these communities. And when grand jurors have knowledge, today the Department of Law wants to try to get rid of you if you have knowledge of facts in a case that they don't agree with or that aren't becoming to them. They want to control the process, but no, that's not how it works. Ray Southwell, when Ray Southwell had evidence of a young girl that looked like maybe she had been intentionally burned by her foster parent, and he brought that to the judge and the district attorney, and they prevented him from bringing forward that evidence. This is just it's almost criminal in nature what's been happening. And then the next paragraph, I just had when a judge becomes aware that a state agency may have violated the constitutional rights of an individual, they should take it upon themselves to call on the grand jury to investigate those actions. And that was, we've seen that was not only in the 1962 version of the Alaska Grand Jury Handbook, but it was also in the 2019. But yet when I made my request for a grand jury last fall in 2022, the presiding judge there, Amy Mee, she told me that she couldn't even read my petition. She said this Rule 6.1 prevented her from doing that. So, judges have duties that they need to fulfill. So in the next two paragraphs, this is something David Haig had underlined or highlighted. So I'm going to go ahead and read all of these because it is important. When a grand jury investigates a matter involving the conduct of an Alaska official or agency, the Superior Court judge responsible for its charge should ensure that the grand jury has the services of an independent special counsel without any conflicts of interest. In those cases, it may be necessary for the judge to arrange for the services of an investigator to assist the grand jury. In circumstances where the matter to be investigated is complex, it may be appropriate for the judge to impanel a special grand jury that can focus singularly on that task. So, case in point, what's going on in Kenai? That grand jury needs an independent special counsel without any conflicts of interest. Going on to the next paragraph. Precedent for the retention of special counsel from outside Alaska in grand jury investigations involving the state of Alaska was firmly established in the Sheffield investigation. The state government paid for the services of George Frampton to be special counsel for the grand jury. As Mr. Frampton was a former Watergate prosecutor and presumably a top caliber attorney, the amount of expense to retain a quality attorney from the outside should not be an issue. This point goes all the way back to the words of Delegate Kilcher from Homer, who said, "Cost should not be an issue when the freedom of someone wrongfully prosecuted or convicted is at stake." And never forget that. If someone complains about the cost, if a bureaucrat complains about the cost, just point them to the words of Delegate Kilcher, what he said in 1956 on the floor. Cost should never be an issue when the freedom of someone wrongfully prosecuted or convicted is at stake. Let's see here. I talked about the last two paragraphs on page 113. I talked about work the legislature has to do, and we're doing that right now. This is what I'm going to be focusing possibly for the next month. I'll be focusing almost all the attention that I can on the legislature, educating them. I mean, today I was able to educate 3 or 4 legislators, and the word is spreading. And I'm being thanked. I'm being thanked by these legislators for what I'm telling. And so it's happening now as we talk. Going over to the next page, I talk about how the Alaska Judicial Council should be thoroughly investigated. I don't want to spend more time on that. We're kind of running out of time here. I'll just leave aside my comments for the Alaska Judicial Council, and I want to end with towards the bottom of page 114, because this is perhaps the most critical issue to keep in mind about grand juries and how they can be successful, and that's being nonpartisanship. I talked about that at the beginning a little bit tonight, and I'm going to end with this. And I guess 3 paragraphs up from the bottom on page 114. I go, and this is what David Hagan underlined: Alaska citizens may want to consider forming a nonpartisan grand jury association like the citizens in New York did. And you guys have already done that. So we're already there. So now that we have the grand jury association, now it's key, it's critical, it's crucial. I don't know enough descriptive words here to make it nonpartisan. My next sentence: the critical concept embodied in such an organization is its nonpartisanship, where political parties have no standing. And I requote Judge Vanderbilt. He goes, "Of course, if grand juries are selected on a partisan basis, partisan presentments might result. The remedy, therefore, is not to abolish presentments, but to abolish partisan grand juries." So this is the task for the Grand Jury Association, for all of you listening that are involved with that. Go out and find that blend. Make sure that your membership, that your officers reflect a balance that is consistent with the state voter rolls. Because believe me, if you come across as being partisan, it's really going to detract from what we all want. And then the last, turning the page. This is something David Haig, the first full paragraph David Haig outlined, and this is very important. An impartial grand jury association would be valuable in helping to educate state officials and jurors about the powers and duties of the grand jury. The association could help establish valuable channels of communication that could help local grand juries resolve issues and even help coordinate investigations that supplement one another. The association could act as a watch committee to help make sure grand juries are able to properly exercise their common law powers and to provide support when needed. And that's so true. The association can basically be a clearinghouse for everything related to grand juries. Education of the public through newsletters, educating state officials, going into schools, educating jurors. It's almost unlimited. And I'll just end, again, with the words of Associate Supreme Court Justice James Wilson. Remember, he was in that initial Supreme Court, and we talked about him in Chapter 2. This was the U.S. Supreme Court. And he viewed the grand jury as, quote, a great channel of communication between those who make and administer the laws and those for whom the laws are made and administered, unquote. And that's just such a powerful statement. It invokes thoughts of cooperation, cooperation between communities and government, and the grand jury being the channel of communication between those two bodies. And so just the last sentence of my book: officials that want to improve communications between the people and government will act to promote the Alaska grand jury. Those officials who don't care what Alaskans have to say will act to destroy it. And I would submit that that's the litmus test that we apply for every single state official from here on out on the issue of grand juries. Those state officials who support it, those are the ones that we want in office. Those are the ones who care what we have to say about our state. The ones who try to put it down, the ones who try to suppress it, those are the ones that we don't want, and those are the ones we want to vote out. So that's it. Book is finished. Yay. I'll turn it over for questions.
Well, thank you, David. I most appreciate it. And I see the room's unmuting things there, so they may have some questions for us.
Okay.
Could we just give him a round of applause in our very
Well, thank you.
We're going to miss you.
yeah.
Well, you guys are, one of the things that we share in common is, and I really applaud, I've said this many times and I'll say it again, I really applaud your group. There's been some things that have happened over the last few years that, have really been a wake-up call it just confirms the words of Martin Luther King when he said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And we see the tyranny that takes hold in some corners of our state, some corners of our government, and it spreads. When it's not checked, it spreads and it gets deeper, and the corruption gets deeper and deeper. And so I really applaud you guys, stepping up as a part of the hardships that were created through some of the COVID restrictions on small businesses and individuals. And, it's all about the Constitution. I hated practicing law, couldn't stand it. For 10 years, I hated every minute of it. But the one thing I do like about the law is the Constitution, because it is that important. So, we share that commonality, that bond between me and your group and those listening. And so, maybe you guys will want to have me back at some point in time, because, this is not just about the book. This is about justice. I'm all about justice. I've been doing this for 4 years because I care about justice. And I see the grand jury as the way to restoring justice. And I think you guys do too.
Yeah.
And it's about, it's about protecting our, it's about protecting our individual rights, and let's get this grand jury thing established and off and running, and maybe we can get this legislation approved for legislative judges, and then let's turn our sights on constitutional amendment. Let's not stop here. Let's get the constitutional amendment that we need to have the people elect our Supreme Court and our Superior Court judges. You know, let's join together and see about a constitutional amendment to elect local prosecutors. You know, so that the you know, prosecutors aren't run out of a central office in Anchorage. That prosecutors are again responsible to people in local communities. Because I think we all know, I mean, I think now many people have complained about things to Governor Dunleavy, and your complaints have gone nowhere. You know, the governor holds all this power, and he's the only one that you can complain to about anybody in the Department of Law. And I have to think that what happened, you know, what David Haig and Ray Southwell and all you have been dealing with there in Kenai, if you elected the local DA there, I think justice would have been served years ago. But these guys, they know that they're, you know, these men and women, they basically know that they've got nobody to fear, and they're not accountable to anybody. So yes, question.
David, since you're in Juneau, you probably know how these bills are written up and who's writing them. And I've always been curious because, and why I bring this up is Machicki at one point was famous for helping us with HB 51. And I don't know if you ever read that.
No.
It's a 6-page outline bill that was going to make us do things like have to have a judge okay for us to get signatures when we were having signature pages out for things like what we've been doing.
Or a judge would have to approve?
Yes, it was exactly counterproductive. Again, so my question is, that's why I asked, that was Machicki now. He's not no spring, you know, he's been around, he knows what's going on. So who's writing these bills? They must be passing them on to somebody.
Well, yeah, thanks for the question. It actually brings up another issue. I'll answer that. But I before I forget, with respect to this legislation, can everybody in the room who's received a copy of my email about this legislation amendments, can you raise your hand if you've seen a copy? Okay, there's a few people who haven't. Can you make sure that you know, someone in there makes sure that everybody listening gets a copy of that? Because one of the important things is that SB 31 by Senator Shower is started off in the State Affairs Committee, and your newly elected Senator Jesse Bjorkman is one of the 5 people on that committee, and he's key. One of the reasons why he's key is that committee is chaired by a Democrat, Senator Kawasaki from Fairbanks. And, you know, Kawasaki may be fair. I'm working with I'm trying to work with his office a little bit, but also on that committee is Senator Matt Klayman. And Klayman he's a former president of the Alaska Bar Association. He was on the board of governors of the Alaska Board Association, and he's a current attorney. And when Senator Shower, when they had invited comment on Senator Shower's bill, Klayman was pretty active in grilling people that were testifying in support of the bill. And Senator Shower really has doubts that his bill is going to get through committee, through the State Affairs Committee, because of the power that Klayman has. He's vice chair of that committee. So it's very important if you agree with what I'm saying, with what I'm proposing in these amendments, you know, do everything you can to compel Bjorkman. I think Bjorkman was generally supportive of you guys on maybe some of the resolutions that have been done. He knows about the grand jury, so and part of this bill now is an amendment to, I want to make, and this will lead into your answer or your first question, is I want the bill to be amended so that it includes this grand jury provision. Now, to answer your question, I'm kind of learning this myself. Like, for instance, Senator Vance, she is chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. And I was called up by her chief of staff 3 or 4 weeks ago and offered the job to write all the legislation. so, yeah. And she had heard, about me through my Must Read Alaska articles. And I think maybe through, some of the efforts, she'd heard about my book and maybe through some of the people there. And she wanted, and she's still looking for somebody because I turned her down. I told her I didn't want to compromise my independence. And I told her my main priority is getting an innocent man out of jail. But I did say I would volunteer for writing, just like I've been volunteering for the last 4 years. I said, I'll help you out in any way that I can, for what I have time for and for things that I agree on. And I had I've been in this last week, I've been in constant communication with her chief of staff. And I very well, I've offered, the sponsor of the House bill is George Rauscher. And I've also, I've been having communications with him. And I've offered my services in drafting up the legislation. Now, so I think it to really, and I'm still kind of figuring all this out because I think, like, for instance, I think every legislator is different. Like you take someone like David Eastman, for instance. I think he's only got one staff member. I think they cut his staff in half. And, but he's an attorney. So he can probably, write he probably writes a lot of his own amendments. I don't know, but I'm just guessing that. And there's, Clayman, I don't know, Clayman probably writes his own legislation. Bill Wilczowski probably writes his own legislation. So I think it varies. And then what I'm learning is that there's also, there's an office within the legislature that will write language for various legislators. In fact, just yesterday, I was here. I'm not going to name names or anything, but someone was telling me how a particular bill may have been killed. It had the votes. It had the votes to pass. And instead of handwriting in a slight amendment, it got sent up to this legal department and they sat on it for 24 hours. And during that 24 hours, the way I understand the story, there was political pressure that came down on a couple people and they lost the vote. So if they had just if they had just taken the handwritten, a simple handwritten amendment and brought it onto the floor, it would have passed. But instead they sent it up to this department. So some staff are up there, I don't know if they did it on their own initiative or at the directive of somebody, but this last week, this last week I was reminded how much that place over there, it's right across the channel here from me. It's right behind me, the Capitol building. It's just an insane asylum. It's a zoo. I know, it really is. I mean, I came away with that feeling last year, and it only took me a week to get that feeling back again. But yeah, it's it's kind of a free for all. I mean, they have all these rules and everything, but I hate to, I won't, you know, I mean, I think there's some rules that aren't enforced. I think there's others that are made up. I think a lot of it depends on who's in power. I'm getting a sense. I mean, I'm learning about this every day that I'm over there. I pick up something more about how things work, you know, and the people who sit up on top and how the power trickles down. And I mean, we all saw this with the caucus, right? We saw how there were a majority of Republican senators elected, but Democrats control the Senate. You know, it's all about the power and who holds it. And so it's very interesting. So does that answer enough of your question? Good. Okay. Any more? Any feedback for me? You guys been, you know, downing your bottles of no-dos before you. That's what we used to do back in college. You know, back then it was no-dos, or I guess you know, a 6-pack of Coke would do the same trick. Yes, Wayne.
Hey, I just want to say thank you, and I appreciate all your information, your hard work on your book.
Yes.
That you answered my phone call or my text when we first discussed getting together and doing something like this. I think the information and the tool that you have provided will serve long and well.
Yes.
Good.
And it has encouraged us and giving us a base knowledge that is so important in a foundation. So as we go forward, we are able to pass that on to other individuals. And I fully intend to do that. And every little bit or chance that I get, I'm discussing grand jury and your book. And if you like your freedoms, you know what? You better look into what the grand jury can do for you. And so I mean, that's sometimes my opening line to people. Who are they? Anything about them. So just knowledge and having a place to go to get knowledge.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, the book came about because you know, this case that just drives me crazy here in Juneau, Thomas Jack Jr.'s wrongful conviction. You know, I wanted a grand jury investigation of that and other cases that were similar to his. And I just, you know, as I got into it, you know, it was like I said at the beginning of the book, it was like peeling back this, you know, this onion, all these layers. And, you know, I got up to 40 or 50 pages in my petition because I'm trying to explain all this. You know, as a lawyer, you know, we're trained to look ahead, you know, at the issues. And I could see that these were going to be brought up and I had to address them. And, you know, I had 50 pages written and there's a lot more to go. So that's how the book came up. And then I was like, well, okay, should I try to, you know, sell this, you know, put it on Amazon or something like that? And I was like, no, you know, this is about truth. Mm-hmm. You know, this is about justice. You can't put a price on it. And, you know, so, I mean, I'm, you know, this book has taken off more than I ever thought it would. You know, and I'm so encouraged by that, you know, and Waynette, all the things that you spoke to, that, you know, it is there to educate. And, you know, we are kind of the elders now of the younger generation, and we have this knowledge. And I just, you know, I feel it's important for us who, you know, for us who care about the state. I mean, I deeply care about this state. I was born 3 blocks from the Capitol building. My mom sang Alaska's flag at the state dedication ceremony in 1959, you know, 1 block away, you know, next door to the Capitol building. You know, my parents and my sister are buried in the cemetery here. There's so many times I want to leave this place, and, you know, maybe I will someday, but I can't turn my back on this. And, you know, I just feel that, you know, we, you know, as many of us are semi-retired or retired, we've seen a lot of things in our lifetimes, you know, we are the elders. And, you know, in the Native communities, it was the elders who ran things. And they educated, you know, education is such a huge part of that. You know, I'm wondering if, you know, some of the stuff could go in schools. You know, we had a presentation on Wednesday at a breakfast group I belong to, and it was by the Alaska Mining Association. And one of my friends in there, you know, he encouraged the leaders of the 2 associations that were in there to promote mining in Alaska. I guess there's only 6 mines in Alaska, 6 underground mines in Alaska, and something like 78 in British Columbia. And but, you know, we talked about how you know, cell phones, how many minerals are needed to produce the cell phone, or electric cars, how many minerals are needed to produce electric cars, and, you know, mining. And Alaska's got all these resources that are bottled up. You know, these are jobs. And, you know, my friend suggested that the AMA start taking their message into schools. You know, he brought up about how when we were all kids, I mean, I remember this, we used to have school assemblies. Someone would show up and talk.
Yeah.
And some of these mining jobs, I mean, we've got 2 big mines here in Southeast. We've got Kensington and Greens Creek that are employing something like 400 to 700 people each. And, you know, they're paying like $130,000 a year to people. And they're having trouble finding workers. So, you know, let's get out in the schools and start educating our kids about these kind of things. And I even think grand juries, you know, there might be a way to get kids thinking about this stuff, and maybe they'll go home and talk to their parents about it, you know, and this is what we need. We need overall community involvement. So yes, another question.
I think you got someone on Zoom that's been trying to get your attention, if I'm not mistaken.
Amy?
Hi, David. This is Betty Jo.
Oh, hey, Betty Jo.
Hi, and I just want to encourage people is to read your House bills. And I put a couple links on the chat, and contact your House of Representatives, contact your senators. I contact them almost every other day, because there is so much that we the people vote them, and so we need to be in contact with our representatives and senators and letting them know what is important to us. And this bill that you've been speaking of, I know what happened to it. Senator Schauer introduced SB 14 last year that had more extensive language. And our laws and the amendments of our laws and the protection of our Constitution shouldn't be dependent upon, well, you vote for my bill and I'll vote for your bill. It's on the need of protecting our rights, on the need to having laws so that our system is balanced. And I will probably go to my grave talking about fellow Alaskans' letter that the Supreme Justices wrote in 2020. And right there, they admit in their letter that they have a bias, whether conscious or unconscious, No, when you take that bench, you are given an oath of fairness. You are to administer the law, and you're not to make it. That's the job of the legislature. That's their responsibility. And so I just want to encourage everyone to follow those, contact your senators and go to the Alaska legislative page, look at those bills. And I hope to see people in Juneau on Saturday morning, and then on Wednesday, the people up here in Anchorage are getting really excited about, the protest, the friendly protest in front of the courthouse down here. And so I want to encourage everyone to show up at your courthouse, because there's strength and power, and we the people need our senators and representatives to listen to us and to act on our behalf. Thank you.
Betty Jo, what do you think for numbers there in Anchorage?
I'm not sure of the numbers. They have this one group called Freedom Fighters, and they're going to show up. And when Thomas Garber went before Judge Morris, there must have been a good 25, 30, 40 people there, and that they just showed up to support him. And so what's really cute is these ladies that I volunteered with on another campaign earlier this summer. They're in their 80s, and they're showing up. They got their signs and everything, and they're just like, where do we go, Betty Jo? And so we expect a good turnout.
Awesome.
Good.
Good.
Yay!
Yeah.
That's great to hear. And hopefully my proposed amendments will be up in that statutory form. But one of the things that my amendments would include is to establish proficiency guidelines in constitutional rights, and cultural awareness for all judges. Under the Constitution, the legislature can actually, even though the Judicial Council is responsible for nominating the individuals for the Supreme Court and the Superior Court, the legislature can establish additional guidelines for them. So what I'm asking is that all judges, not only Court of Appeal and District and Grand Jury and Family Court, but the Superior and Supreme Court judges, have to establish and maintain a certain level of proficiency in both the Constitution and in cultural awareness. I think that'll help, because it's beyond, well, I don't know if I've shared this with you, but I'm gonna bring it up later if in public testimony. But my one of my best friends in California, one of my law school roommates, we met in law school, and he's still a very close friend to this day. He ended up he was a public defender his entire career, and he ended up being the chief of staff of the Los Angeles County Public Defender's Office. He had 700 attorneys under his control when he retired. He just retired last year. And I told him what happened to Thomas Jack Jr. I told him about the constitutional violations. And he just told me, it was on the phone, he goes, that would never happen here in California.
Really?
Yep.
Really? Yeah. Wow.
I know.
Now that is saying, there are so many constitutional violations in that case. And
Good night. Good night. Thank you.
all right, good night.
We were talking to Kim.
Oh, okay.
I was just
thought
gonna.
maybe you had to go or something like
Nobody's
that.
here.
But are we done?
It sounds like we're good. There may be still some people remaining in the room there, but they muted because there's folks in transition.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Cody, for all that you and Chandra have done in setting this up.
Oh, absolutely. Glad to be a facilitator in the process. Thanks for being here. And I see waving in the distance. I think that is a goodbye wave. So I'll go ahead and button up the live stream. Thanks for being here, and looking forward to future opportunities to hear more about what's going on.
Okay, Cody. All right. Good night.
All right. Take care.
Okay, hopefully I got everything muted there on the other end so we don't have to hear any other videos start up. Thank you guys all for being here tonight. You can find this live on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Rumble, all at Politadick. And make sure on Rumble, this video will be there hopefully within the next 6 hours, but they seem to be taking a couple of days lately to be transferring them over to there. But you can help solve that problem by going to rumble.com and typing in my name, Politadick, Politadick. Make sure that's an A, not an I in the center there. And subscribe to us. Follow us. Even if you're not a Rumble, someone who doesn't do Rumble, just sign up long enough to subscribe to us. We're trying to reach 100 followers there. I mean, we've got over 800 likes on our page so far, but we just don't have enough people subscribing to us yet. And we need your help to make that happen. And but as soon as we reach 100 people there, we're able to live stream to them directly, and we won't have to worry about being censored by YouTube or Facebook when we show videos that don't align with their political agenda. Kind of like the one that we streamed a few nights ago that exposed the carbon credits and carbon capture, the new currency, the ESG that they are pushing on the world right now and throughout the nation. And if enough people sign into that ESG program, we're going to find ourselves completely bankrupt within the next 10 years. And within the next 30, most of Alaskans won't be living here anymore because we just won't be able to afford to. Our government would be trying to take too much away from us to be able to pay those bills if these kind of things are to happen. Again, this is a great breakdown. This March 15th, at every Alaska courthouse, there is a sit-in planned by Alaskans for Constitutional Rights, Alaskans for Grand Jury Investigations. I could keep on going down the list. I provided every link I could think of in the comments today, also in the description for this video. You can find them all on Facebook and YouTube, I believe. I tried to make sure that it got posted to both of those. And but please dig into the information. It's going to be a sit-in. They're going to be happening all throughout the state of Alaska, wherever there is a courthouse located. So we're talking like Juneau, Anchorage, Kenai, the Mat-Su, Fairbanks, and I think in Yugotovic, where wherever there is a courthouse, we're hoping to find people showing up at 8 a.m. and go and have a sit-in demanding Alaska grand jury rights be restored to us Alaskans, and we can start the investigations into our corrupt judicial branch, demanding them in panel grand juries to start investigating them. We need to impanel grand juries to start investigating, say, OCS and the child abduction program that they've got going on here in the state of Alaska. I mean, I could keep going right on down the list. We can empower a grand jury to investigate our permanent fund dividend and the theft of that and the bypassing of our laws that are in place that they've been outright breaking, and the accountability also of the judicial branch not upholding the laws but making it the sole discretion of those legislators to decide which laws they want to follow and which laws they want to break. If any of us average Alaskan citizens tried to do what they do there in Juneau, we would be thrown in jail instantly, and we would not pass go, we would not collect $200, and we would be sitting there for a very, very, very long time if we were to break the laws like they do in Juneau. And we need to hold them accountable. And one of the tools that can help us make that happen is Alaska grand juries. We can impanel a grand jury to go after the legislators in Juneau. The same thing we got going on with our Alaska school system. We could impanel grand juries to investigate our school districts and really find out what type of corruption and real political agenda that has been installed into the education system. There's a reason why it's failing. And it's not because our teachers don't know how to teach. It's the problem is what the government, the propaganda machine out there that seems to control everything that fails, exactly the same way with our school systems. We need to get back to the basics, not the woke agenda. I mean, they're more worried about a child whose parents are not feeding them. They need to make sure every child is fed in school because you, me, we parents are too incompetent to do it ourselves. We should all be turned into OCS, who I mentioned just a little bit ago, for neglect and abuse of our child because we can't provide them hot or cold lunches to be taking to school. You know, I have no problem making lunch for my child and sending them to school with it. Yes, it does cost me money, but what's the difference? If I'm teaching them at home, I'm teaching them they're being taught in a school, they're being taught somewhere else. My child's welfare is always my number one concern. I will make sure my child will never go hungry. But hey, you offer me a free meal that I don't have to worry about paying for. Dang right, I'm going to take it. You keep giving away all of these free programs and everybody qualifies, especially during the pandemic. I mean, they raised the income limit to make sure that they got more people on welfare. I mean, 36% of Alaskans now live on welfare. Why do we have an employment problem here in Alaska? The same reason we're seeing it all across the nation. They raised the income limits. They made it easier to get on welfare here in Alaska. You don't have to make so much anymore to be able to qualify for these programs, and 36% of Alaskans are currently living in and on welfare, and that is their sole survival for their ability to live in Alaska for the majority of them, and I will not say the minority because we went from 18% to 36%. We've doubled the number of people since the pandemic that are now on welfare here in Alaska, and that's why they're trying to push and pass all of these social engineering programs within our schools and also within our own communities. You can see it happening all over the place where assembly members of your community, like in Anchorage, where they're really pushing the very far woke agenda. If you pay attention to any of their work groups throughout the day, it's all about social engineering for housing and homeless and every issue that is not addressing everybody within the community they're supposed to represent. It's always lining the same pockets of the same individuals that have been getting lined for decades now, and you wonder why your roads are not plowed, you wonder why you got potholes everywhere, and you wonder why your roofs are caving in because they're more worried about funding the woke agenda and the special interests pocketbook, especially the administration side of things in most cases. and instead of making sure the roofs are shoveled off so they don't go caving in. You know, they got 2 libraries in Anchorage right now that are in public schools that are unusable because they had to condemn them because of the rafters that they have in the roofs are failing and they are starting to buckle and cave in. And why is that happening? Because they didn't shovel them and they're flat roofs. How stupid can you be? Isn't it kind of ironic that we're seeing a trend in library roofs that are collapsing at the same time? I don't know if it's conspiracy theory, you call it whatever you want, but it's kind of ironic when the issues for books that are within schools and we're trying to address what they are teaching to our children or allowing them to read and check out, that all of a sudden certain libraries are no longer accessible. I mean, and oh yeah, you can't even read a book inside of one of the school board meetings in Anchorage. They took that right away. Well, the Alaska Grand Jury, we could impanel, like I said, an Alaska Grand Jury to investigate the corruption and the political influences that have been installed within our schools here in Alaska. And we need to get that removed. We could panel a grand jury to make that happen, hold the people accountable that are no longer following the laws that we have. Instead, they push the woke agenda. I mean, when you got a child can sign a form changing their name, changing their gender, changing their sex, and everything else, and this is kept from us, the parents, we're not even to know about it. This also same form is given to their employees and said, here, the teachers, whatever, that want to sign this document that they too may be wanting to identify as a different gender. And also on this form, it has on it broken out what you prefer to be called when your parents or someone in the public outside of the school safe zone would prefer you to be called. So if you want to go by your real name when your parents are around or you're in an assembly and you do not want to be identified by your pronouns because that would get you in trouble at home, so to speak. But in school, that's safe. They have a form. And who signs off on this? You would think the parent, right, would sign off on this document, even though I gave you the bad side of it, that they do keep it from us and give them the ability to hide that. But it's not us, the parents, it's the principal of the school. Let that sink in for just a moment. The principal of the school has the right to be able to give permission for the teachers and himself or herself and everybody and every student in that school to completely identify, degenderify, pronounify, completely lose their mentality. All I hear is delusional comments coming out of my mouth. You would think this is all a delusion, that I am just totally insane, but this is what's in our school system. We need to do something to help fight this and cure these problems. And like I said, I could keep going on and on and on when it comes to the corruption in Juneau. They brought up Matt Clayman's name. I have known he is bought and paid for by the Judicial Branch of Alaska. He is a lawyer. He advocates everything that has to do, that has anything that's going to affect the judicial branch, and he comes armed with all of that legal knowledge that he has within his head. And we've got too many cowardly representatives down in Juneau, and I'm not even going to say that it is the Democrats or it's the Republicans. It's both of them. They're both so damn corrupt in Juneau, it is unreal. There is a reason why the FBI considers Alaska's government the second most corrupt government in the United States of America. They are only second to those in D.C. And that's not a lie. That's not no made-up statistic. This is actually FBI data that they themselves have come out and said where the most corruption in our nation is located at within government. Alaska is number 2, and D.C. is number 1. That tells you everything you need to know when it comes to who really controls things when it comes right down to it. There is no other state in the United States that has a judicial branch that has the controlling body on who gets to sit on the judicial branch. They are the only ones that got that sole authority. They got a 4-3 vote there. I believe that's how that one works out. They are one more, and the deciding person is the person that sits on the Supreme Court. And they decide that who's going to be the actual person that gets sat in that seat, and who does the picking of the judges that are to be presented. It is the judicial branch. They are not selected from a list given for us Alaskans to have, say, representatives like maybe the Senate. The 20 in the Senate sit down and actually do interviews with different judges, ask them questions about their judicial philosophies and thinking and rulings in past cases that they have done here in the state of Alaska before they get appointed to these positions that are, in most cases, pretty much a lifetime position, because they seem to always get re-voted back in to hold their seats once they get in them. That seems to be how it works here in Alaska. I only can recall once, maybe twice in our entire history. I know once for sure that they removed a judge, and that was just a few years ago, because of how he ruled in a sexual case based upon the laws that they had in place under SB 91 and the sexual assault laws that we had here and how they were worded. He got away with murder, so to speak, and the judge's hands were tied, but he still got vilified because he just did not throw the book at this person and write his own laws from the bench. So that's how they treat judges that don't follow the agenda. They, for the first time in far history, as long as I've been alive, that I've been paying attention anyways. I didn't really research it, but first time I have ever heard of a judge being removed when it came time to retain judges on the ballot. And now the grand jury investigation, here they are. They've David Haig has been in this battle for a very, very long time. I wish I would have saved the link, but way back when he was in court, he was testifying on his own case. He was battling with the judge and everything else, and the next thing you know, and I say battling as in verbally, fighting his case, the next thing you know, he is being arrested and thrown to the ground in the courtroom and being hauled out. And you guys, if once you see the video, or you get a little bit better explanation than what I'm able to give here right now, this battle has been going on for a very long time. In fact, our judicial branch pretty much started taking the teeth out of Alaska grand juries back when Sheffield was here. You know, Governor Sheffield. Do a little bit of history looking back on the case of the Alaska grand jury, looking into him, and you can see what happened from then until where we are now. Now, the Alaska court system, you may have missed it, but I didn't, because I subscribe to them on Facebook, and Facebook loves making sure their posts make it to me, so I get to see everything that they're doing. They're one of the few things that they actually do make sure I see every time. And the Alaska court system put out their own rebuttal to how an Alaska grand jury works. And I will do my best to remember when this is over with here to share a link of that onto my page at Politadick on Facebook. And but you guys can get a chance to look at that and actually see what they're saying versus all the videos that I have produced with David Haig talking and Scott Egger, I think is his last name, and David Ingell here today for the last 14 weeks. And I believe it's 14 weeks or 10 weeks that he's been doing this broadcast for his book. And bottom line is the rebuttal that they gave out there glosses over what they did. They took the teeth out of the grand jury back in November and December of last year. And the way they did this is they took away their powers by changing a rule, 1993, I think is the number on that one. And that rule was completely changed, and they said, oh, it was benign. It was nothing really important in their rebuttal, that is. And they broke it down in short little paragraphs, breaking down all of their talking points. But the one that I'm going to make here is the rule that got changed that they gloss over. That rule was changed unilaterally by one judge because of the investigation into the corruption in the judicial branch. And this judge says, no, we're going to change this rule. We're going to take the teeth out of grand juries, their indictment powers, their subpoena powers, all the stuff that they really do need to be able to completely go after an investigation and bring charges available to committable crimes. That here are the charges that need to be applied, and make it so that the judges and whatnot don't have the final rule on whether or not this stuff gets brought forward in front of them in the first place. And they took all the teeth out of the grand jury so that they're just basically a body of people that are, as long as you do what the agenda that you've been assigned by them is, everything will be hunky-dory. But if you want to investigate, say, OCS or the judicial branch or the legislative branch in Juneau for what they did for the PFD, or the judicial branch for their corruption involved with the PFD, not following the laws that are already on the books, but saying you can ignore them instead, or, you know, just the outright corruption of the judicial branch to where they legislate from the bench, and our legislators, as long as it's a part of their agenda, turn a blind eye to it and never bring charges against them because they're too scared of the judicial branch. Can you kind of see the full circle going on here? Take the teeth out. Well, now the rule that was changed, there is a panel of 13 people. These are the rule committee is the best way to describe who these people are. And these are a bunch of lawyers and scholars and people that are very well versed in our Constitution and everything else and the laws. And this rule is supposed to be vetted by them, the changes of the rule, before it ever gets and have an actual vote on whether or not this should move forward, or here's all the things that we see problems with. Well, the rule change was handed out, and out of the 13 people in the rules committee, and they were like a week or two away from meeting in person, they were all away in different places doing their things at this period of time, and their normal committee meeting wasn't for a couple weeks. And 3 out of the 13 were able to respond to the judge's proposed rule change. And out of those 3, 2 of them that responded outright said what the judge was wanting to do in the rule change was unconstitutional. Instead of waiting the couple weeks for the entire panel to get together or all of them to weigh in before making a decision, the judge unilaterally changed the grand jury's way they are able to function by changing this rule, taking all the teeth out of their investigations to bring charges and really expose the corruption that is going on within the judicial branch or any grand jury investigation, unless, of course, like I said a little bit ago, it aligns with their agenda. So 2 out of the 3 that responded, out of the 13 that sit on this rules committee panel that should have been vetted through before any changes ever happened, the 3 that did respond, 2 of them said outright this is unconstitutional. And then here comes out, and you can find them on Facebook. It is Alaska court system, excuse me. I had to think there for a second about the name of the place. It's Alaska Court System if you want to look them up on Facebook. And it might be 1 or 2 posts back at this point since it came through to me. But they talk about the Alaska grand jury and what it is, and their opinion of how the Alaska grand jury is supposed to work. And you can find where they gloss over the rule change that I just got done describing and how the process for that is supposed to work versus the unilateral rubber stamp decision the judge made all on their own. And it's no surprise the person that does the brings the charges and everything else that a grand jury would bring towards judges and everything else, miraculously after decades of being in the position, that particular person has retired right when all of this is going on. And if you look at that person's record, they have never brought any grand jury charges in any investigations that have been brought forward with ample evidence to bring charges has ever gone through. Because if it didn't align with the agenda, it got vetoed. And what do you think is going to happen when you look into the corruption of the judges themselves? What's going to happen? Well, that same person, this is why the rule change was made, to protect themselves. Impaneling a grand jury does not require any judicial input. It's what we Alaskans can do. It's our rights. It's our way to check and balance the judicial branch or anybody out there. Like I said, we could be impaneling them to investigate OCS. We can impanel them to go after our Alaska school systems. We could impanel them to go after our legislative branch in Juneau for breaking the law and stealing our PFDs for the last 8 years. We could do all of this stuff with our rights that we have to impanel Alaska grand juries. But thanks to the rule change they did last year, even if we did or was able to gain our powers that we rightfully have back away from and stolen through rule changes by the judicial branch, that is 100% against our Alaska Constitution about Alaska grand juries. And remind you, these rules completely contradict, most of them that they've changed so far completely contradict what the grand jury was impaneled to do from the start, and the judicial branch has slowly tried to say, well, you can't do this without an attorney being a part of the grand jury. No, this is a citizen grand jury, not an attorneys. We're not here for your laws. We're here to investigate what we are interested in, no matter what the subject may be. I've listed off several different ones we could go after. We got to work hard. And okay, I am going to, I could keep going on this subject for a very long time, but March 15th, 8 a.m., every Alaskan courthouse, we are hoping to find as many people that can afford to, that have the day off, might be willing to take the day off, to show up at the Alaska courthouses throughout the state and invite your friends, make it a powwow. If you're part of groups out there somewhere that you are a part of, get the message out. Start a little event on your page and invite everybody to be there. Right now, I've got to work that day, so I don't know what I'm going to do at this point. I'm trying to see if I can get around it, but I already had stuff scheduled long before this came up. But 8 a.m. at Anchorage Courthouse, the Palmer Courthouse, and you got Juneau, you got Kenai, you got Fairbanks, you got Yugotovic. Anywhere there's an Alaskan courthouse that is open, they're asking you to go sit in. I know the biggest sit-in is going to be happening in Kenai. I'm hearing rumors there might be around 40 people in the Anchorage courthouse. I have not heard any rumors about what's happening out here in the Mat-Su, but I'm sure there's going to be people there. I'm not in that particular circle at the moment. A lot of these folks out there here in the valley, they don't like me anymore because I'm too conservative for them. My viewpoints have changed a lot since I first started doing this. I used to be, I'm all Republican. Now I'm a conservative. I'm not, I've been undeclared this entire time, but I kind of considered myself a Republican in the very beginning of this because I was new and an infant and just didn't know anything about politics when I first started this, to this person that now knows more about what usually is going on in Juneau than the legislators that are down there in Juneau actually know about what's going on. And the same with what's going on in my community. Problem is, you get burnt out after a while trying to keep up with it all. And when the finances of being able that were vastly available. The money that I had sitting in my pocket, I had a lot of disposable cash a couple of years ago. Thanks to Joe Biden, I no longer have that disposable cash, and you guys can help me fix that problem, which is how I'm going to end this. The sit-in is on March 15th, starts at 8 a.m. All courthouses. We're going to demand, we want our Alaska grand jury rights back, and we want to impanel grand juries, and I gave you a list full that you can always listen to again to go after that. We would love to impanel these grand juries to go do all of these different things, and that's all you have to say. I mean, there's no other reason for being there other than we want our rights to the Alaska grand jury restored, the rule change taken away that they had done, and any involvement with the judicial branch up to the point the grand jury is ready to bring everything forward and present their evidence to them needs to stay the hell out of the way, unless it's required to get, like, say, a subpoena to bring somebody into the grand jury's room so that they can question them. Stuff like that. The powers and rights of the grand jury need to be restored, and the judicial branch needs to bow out of the way, because that is not their job. That's not what the Alaska grand jury or any grand jury in the United States is there for. And this is that's all I'm going to say on that. But help me do more. I want to make more events. I want to be able to do more things. Right now, I'm going to places that are very convenient, because usually I've got work that's located somewhere near them, and I'm taking advantage of that at the same time I'm trying to stream something. But in most cases, there's people like you, my supporters, that help donate, and they go to my website at politadick.com and they click that support button, and everything I get goes right back into what I'm doing here. Your support has made it possible for me to be using Restream services now. I'm on year number 2 now, and there will be a year number 3 for the Restream, so that you guys can watch this live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, all at the same time. Rumble, as soon as we get enough subscribers there. All of this is at Politadick, including our website. And if you just type in my name into Google, I dominate the feed for the search engine there for my name. Everything you ever want to see, it pulls up about me. I'll tell you what. So please help us out, support us. Like I said, everything goes right back into what we're doing here. You guys have seen, those that have been out there when I'm streaming and have seen the equipment that I now have, from what I started out with. You guys know that I am reinvesting everything right back into what I'm doing here. I do have a dream one day of finding myself being able to have people going all over the state. If you're at an assembly meeting, I'll hand you a camera rig and a tripod and say, I want you to do nothing but hit the button and click start, and make sure you point different directions and zoom in every once in a while. And I'll pay you to do it. And then myself personally, I want to be down in Juneau when they're having sessions like they are right now. I want to be sitting in those committee meetings and sitting in the back room just listening to what they have to say. And the moment they walk out of that room, I have my tripod, my camera, and everything else is set up just outside the door, ready to ask them a bunch of questions about what the hell just happened in there. Why did you vote that way? How stupid are you? You know, the fun questions that our mainstream media should be doing. But when was the last time you ever seen a interview with a legislator walking through the halls of Juneau that wasn't a pre-planned press release, sitting staged, all ready to go, like they're putting on now once a week, trying to impress us? Look at how important we are now. We're doing press briefings once a week, something that we quit doing 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago, because they stopped doing it pre-pandemic. I mean, they had already stopped it because we were onto their agenda. Every time they opened their mouths, they were screwing us over. Well, now they've got control of everything. Mainstream media is no longer following them like they were. Pandemic's over. There's no reason to keep an eyeball on them. They're no longer being as controversial, so it appears, but that's only because mainstream media is talking them up as the heroes, the good guys. we're going to spend other people's money, your money, my money, to give to all of these people, the 36% of Alaskans that are living in poverty. Let's just not mention the students that have the worst education in the nation at nearly triple the cost. That's not enough money. We need to give them more. We need to give them 270 million more, or 321 million if you go over to the House. I mean, the cost is just astronomical. And then, oh man, we got to retain those employees, so we got to be able to give them pensions and defined benefits that are going to last a lifetime. That is basically, here's your salary for that you make while you're working. We're going to give that to you for the rest of your life, and it's going to be transferable probably to your children and your wife or husband and or whatever they may want to call themselves. And then you just find yourself, our state just falling further and further and further in debt. And then the scenario that I gave at pretty much the very beginning of me talking here today, have over half of the population moves out. Everybody else that still lives here is living on welfare, and government is pretty much the only employment that you can get, except for the big box stores that government can't actually operate because that would be illegal for them to be doing. Well, kind of like what a lot of the stuff that they do, if you truly think about it, they break a lot of laws, but they're the ones that write the laws, and so they're above the law, so they can do whatever they want anyways, right? Like I said, you and I do what they do down there in Juneau, and we'd be in jail for the rest of our lives. All right, thank you guys all for being here tonight. Again, like, share, subscribe, click that bell to be notified every time we go live. Go to rumble.com, help us grow to 100 subscribers there so we can be on one more channel that'll guarantee us not being uncut and unfiltered, and don't have to worry about being banned or censored for what someone may say if it's too controversial for, say, YouTube or Facebook. And maybe Twitter, it used to be, but Musk is a lot more lenient than what they used to be. I'm liking the platform a lot more. Before, I didn't want nothing to do with it. Alrighty, guy. Thank you very much for being here. We do appreciate it. And again, go to our website, Politadick.com. Snap a picture here at the end of our broadcast of what is about ready to come onto the screen, and it'll make things really easy for you to be able to just scan in the QRC code and go to all of our different channels, or help us grow and go to our support page and make a donation today.